He's a clinical associate professor in family medicine at MUN. He's an entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist. And it's a pleasure to welcome him to the program. His name is Dr. Brian Ramjatten. Welcome, Brian.
Well, thank you, Karl. Thanks for having me on the show.
Tell me a little bit about your ancestry and about Trinidad and Tobago, your family roots.
Yeah, well, my mom and dad are both from Trinidad and Tobago, but they're from different parts. As you've correctly pointed out, Trinidad and Tobago is a Caribbean island, and it's made of two islands. Trinidad, which is the larger island, about 60 miles by 40 miles, and then the smaller island is Tobago. People from the island of Trinidad sometimes go to Tobago for holidays, really, right? So it's that type of thing. My mom was from Port of Spain, which would be one of the major cities in Trinidad and Tobago. And my dad grew up more in a farming type atmosphere in Barrackpore. So, you know, we had a couple of, my mom's family was more into the business world because my grandfather had both his parents died at the age of 9, and he then went into business at the age of 9, you know, with a very unique business model. Back then, Trinidad and Tobago was really well known for sugar and exporting sugar cane and exporting sugar itself. So the sugar often was exported in Brin bags. And at the age of 9, my grandfather somehow saw an opportunity to take the Brin bags that were actually damaged, take them home, sew them up, and with a pushcart sell it back. And eventually that grew into a fairly good, thriving business. He had some real estate and stuff. So that would be, you know, and that was hard times for him. He was 9 with no parents. There was one of his relatives that took him in, and he to this day continues to give back to the community. Well, not to this day because he's passed away, but when he was alive, he would have events at his house where 100 or 200 people that were on the street would come in. On my father's side, he was more into a farming family, a sugarcane farming family, and he would be able to trace his roots back to South India, where the South Indians came over and were actually indentured laborers for the British. Indentured laborers are not the same totally as a slave, but you get paid a very little bit of money to do a fair bit of work. And then after that, my grandfather was eventually, you know, through generations, they were eventually able to have their own farm. And I think that the 9 children that came from that family all went on to have university educations and do different various professions. So that's quite a story, I really feel.
Well, it's pretty obvious to me where your entrepreneurial spirit came from.
Yes, yes.
It's inherited.
Yes.
Now, you grew up in Springdale in the 70s and 80s. Today, Springdale is a town of about 3,000 people with a fair amount of infrastructure. I'm just wondering what it was like back in the 70s and 80s when you were growing up.
Well, surprisingly enough, back then it still did have a fair bit of infrastructure. I recall that, you know, it had a movie theater. It had, back then, we were back in the day when we had the denominational school system. So you had the Pentecostal schools and the integrated schools, which is where I went. They had their pool hall where I learned how to play pool. They had their little eateries, but we spent a lot of time at pool halls and pinball places and eateries, and they had a curling club that my dad used to spend a bit of time at. They had a rink, a soccer field. So I remember all those things. And I think the population probably might have even been a little bit higher back at that time.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
okay.
So I think they might have lost some you know, citizens from Springdale, right?
Yeah. Now, when you moved here, you came from Halifax, which was a large metropolitan area. You were young, but I imagine you still have some memories of your early days in Newfoundland. You came originally to Glenwood, and then eventually to Springdale. What was that like for you? I mean, you were coming from Halifax to a small rural community in Newfoundland. Must have been a little bit of a transition.
It certainly was a big change for me. I remember I was 5 years of age. I'd been, you know, I went to kindergarten in Halifax. We first went to Glenwood, Glenwood was even a smaller community in Springdale. If you
Yes,
back in that day,
yeah.
I mean, there might have been 300-400 people there. I went to school there, and my mom had taught me how to read and everything in kindergarten, along with the schooling system there. So I skipped a grade. I went from grade kindergarten to grade 2, and then we moved from Glenwood to Lewisport to Springdale. But to get to your question, there certainly were, there were some different experiences in the sense that when I was in Halifax, I had, classmates that were African, classmates that were Asian, classmates that were Jewish. When I came to Glenwood, all my classmates, there was none of that diversity really. So I noticed that even at the age of 5, you notice these things. And I guess that it's just something that you notice, and at that young age, all children are fairly innocent, and it's just something that you notice at that stage of your life.
What was it like at school, grade school, when you were growing up?
Grade school was a fairly positive experience for me. I was lucky enough to do fairly well in school, so that helped with things. And because I was able to do fairly well in school, and I had a desire to do well at most things, it allowed me to participate in a lot of activities and sports, which helped formulate some good relationships with people. It also helped me to overcome some of the diversity issues that existed.
Well, what was your favorite sport?
Oh my! I had lots of favorite sports. I liked hockey. I was the captain of the school hockey team, or assistant captain. I played volleyball. I played basketball. I think the thing I liked the most, and a lot of people don't notice about Springdale, Springdale's actually a mecca for table tennis. So much so that we had tables given to us by the government. We had a table tennis coach. We had a room in the school where they actually made table tennis rackets for us. So, through that, I was reasonably good. I was probably number 2 in Atlantic Canada for my age group when I was under 13. But there were so many players there that were better than me, that were young but still competing almost at the men's level, at men's A national level, right? And I used to play table tennis in the morning, table tennis recess time, table tennis at lunchtime, table tennis after school. So I would say table tennis was my favorite sport, based on that.
You learn something every day. Who knew Springdale was a table tennis mecca?
Yeah, we had some great players. Karl Wells might be a name that you've have heard over the years, and Mike Ryan. So.
Wow, good. Brian, you mentioned diversity a couple of times now since you've been on the show. I want to ask you this question. I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to you, because we've talked about this ourselves privately in various venues. You and your family, you moved to. You're a minority family, a family of color. You're moving to this island in the middle of the Atlantic, and it's populated by mostly white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. When you went there, did your family experience any kind of intolerance directed toward you because of your skin color?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that would be yes. But at the same time, we also need to be mindful that there were, in those communities, a lot of great people that did not have those intolerances. So it would be a mixed answer. But the intolerances were probably, now that I'm older and I look back at it, I think more based on kind of lack of experience, lack of education about what it means to be in a community with somebody of some diversity, really. I mean, I remember being called all sorts of names that wouldn't even make sense if we were to talk about it. So, these, and how did this affect me? I think I was more confused by anything, because, my mother and father were very strong role models in my life, and they taught me to, really put value in my life, my family, and gave me a good set of values. So we talk about that, and I thought, it struck me as odd, but at the same time, I realized it might be an obstacle that I would have to overcome. And I found participating in sports, activities, being the best that you can be, helping people whenever you can, showing love and compassion, trying to be a leader, certainly help with that. And I must say, there were some teachers in the school over the years that probably recognized some of these diversity issues and put me in positions to allow me to, have those leadership roles. I mean, back when I went to school, the captain of the hockey team wasn't picked by the players. It was usually your coach or your teacher that picked it, right? And I think that might have been done for two reasons. Maybe one reason to show people that a person of a different color can also be a leader, maybe that was his thought. Or maybe it was, something to help me along the way. I'm not sure. I mean, I was a skilled athlete, but there were certainly other people that were equally skilled or better that could have fulfilled those roles. So I think sports, activities, trying to, engulf yourself with the activities of the community certainly helped. And my mom and dad did similar things. My mom was on the minor hockey, so they were at the Lions Club. They tried to do the best they could with those types of things.
Do you know whether your mom and dad had to experience any racism?
I think they did, yeah. I mean, I was young,
yeah,
but young ears hear all the time, right? And
yeah.
I remember conversations that mom and dad would have that would reflect upon racism, things about, I remember my mom thinking one time that, she had 3 master's degrees, a master's in English, a master's in educational curriculum, and I think a master's in guidance. And there were certain job opportunities I think that she felt that she was, not given for 2 reasons. Partly being female was a big thing too, and also being a person of color, right?
Yeah. How did they handle it?
Well, they handled it by similar to the way I handled it. They engrossed themselves in the community. They tried to be as helpful as they could. I mean, a large part of that humanitarian spirit, that wanting to give, that wanting to help in my community has come from my mom and dad, and that has even transgressed to my own daughter, who was the Young Humanitarian of the Year for Newfoundland Labrador 4 or 5 years ago. So I think in the end, love, compassion, and caring win all the battles, right?
Mm. Why do you think people feel the need to put other people down like that?
Well, I've given this a lot of thought. In our current environment, we look at racism in the United States, but that sometimes makes a little bit of sense to me, because I'm aware, not that it's right, but if you're trying to make anything make sense, the southern states had a whole economy built on slavery. When slavery got abolished, that led to issues of labor supply for their cotton farms or whatever else they had there. Also, back in those days, I've went to different plantations in the south of the states. Slaves were an actual asset. It would be unheard of today that you could borrow against your labor force. Mm. So there was an economic reason for racism to rise its ugly head there. I'm not sure in Newfoundland and Labrador why that would happen. I don't know. Again, is it a lack of education? Is it a fear? Is it a fear that some people might take jobs belonging to them? Or is there an economic reason? Both my parents were fairly educated, and it was tough. In the beginning we had absolutely nothing, but with education and things like that, my mom was a teacher, my father was a coordinator at the school board. We were doing reasonably well in a small town like Springdale.
Well,
so,
you would have been leaders in the community.
Yeah, so I don't know if that plays a role. Or maybe sometimes the unknown plays a role. When you don't know something, you may fear it, and you may react differently than when you're dealing with a certain set of circumstances that you do know. So in short, I really don't know.
Yeah, right? Is it better today?
Oh, I think it's better today. I think we still have a lot of work to do, but it's certainly a lot better today. When I look at people that are my daughter's age, my daughter's 28, and that group of people, those types of things aren't tolerated, and they think differently. They think differently about, gender issues. They think differently about religion. They think differently about visible minority issues. And I think, I'm not a big social media guy, I have a flip phone, and I don't participate in Facebook, but I do think social media and that global internet connectivity has allowed people to see the world through the eyes of others, and has made the world a smaller place where people of different ethnicities become your neighbors, and leads to a different education process and a different set of glasses that you look at it through. So I think things are better, and I think things will get better in our province. So the government has recently formed a committee of several different ministers to look into the racism here in the province. That happened in 2021. And I think they're really going to need to do that because immigration is going to be a big asset to this province in the future to help with the declining population.
Since you brought it up, maybe we should talk about I said you were an entrepreneur.
Yes.
You're involved with a company called Work Global Canada Incorporated. Tell me what the purpose of that company is. How does that work?
So Work Global is a company that matches labor, foreign labor, to different employers in Newfoundland or in Canada for that matter. The main idea of the company was that it was well recognized back in earlier years that Newfoundland was going to face a problem with its labor force for simple reasons. We have one of the oldest demographics in Canada, probably in North America. So you have a lot of people retiring, a lot of people, dying. We're not replacing those people. Our birth rate is not really high. We also have an exodus of young talent. I mean, I trained at Mon, I became a physician, I stayed here. There's not a lot of people doing that, as you can imagine. So that leads to out-migration. Out-migration then leads to population decline. When population declines, it has economic issues. Our transfer payments, for example, are based on population somewhat. The number of people that we have in government and the federal level are based on population. So, how do you fix that problem? Well, the only way to fix it really is through immigration. So, and that's a really good point. I would like people to understand that immigration is a positive thing for Newfoundland and Labrador. It's not that immigrants from Ireland or South Africa or India or China or England are taking Newfoundland and Labradorian jobs. They're actually stimulating the economy because the jobs that they are placed in are one of two. Either there are no Newfoundland and Labradorians or Canadians qualified who want to take the job, or sometimes it's an issue of qualifications, and sometimes it's an issue of they just don't want to work at that particular job. So you get both spectrums. You see a lot of foreign workers coming into the food service industry. If you look at Tim Hortons, you'll see a lot of probably Filipino or different people of different ethnicities. But it also works on the other side. You could have an aquaculture business, for example, and you might need a highly trained PhD scientist. You may not be able to find that here. If you bring it in, say, from Ireland or let's say India for that matter, and they come over, that then allows that business to flourish, because that's the bottleneck.
Yes.
And then you can employ 100 people. So I think, so that's what that company does. And the government has a mandate to bring in, I think, 5,600 new people a year to help kind of cushion that population decline.
Yeah. And of course, it doesn't only enrich us economically, the diversity enriches us culturally.
Absolutely.
Bring people from all of these different countries. It just makes Newfoundland and Labrador a much more interesting place to live.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's always nice to learn from different cultures, different things, how they, I mean, one of the key things, and you know this from being a food critic and having cooking shows, that food is a wonderful blend of culture and love and, that type of thing. So.
Yeah. Brian, I want to ask you this question. I know that your favorite song is "Don't Stop Believin'," and it has a line in it about rolling the dice. Are you somebody who likes to roll the dice?
Oh yeah, I like to roll the dice. That's part of what being an entrepreneur is about, taking risk. Yeah, that is my favorite song. And I actually, before that segment of rolling the dice, it says, working hard to get my fill, everyone wants a thrill, right?
Yeah.
So that's a part of it too. Yeah. And those two lines really, songs are art. Yeah. Art people interpret any way they want. I take that song as a real anthem to, allow one to be inspired to keep moving on despite adversity. Mm. I mean, don't stop believing. Mm-hmm. Hold on to that feeling, right?
Yeah. That's a nice segue into talking about Carolina East. I know you like to help artists, people in the arts. You've been doing that for many years. Carolina East is a young Newfoundland and Labrador country singer that you've been supporting in her career and helping her get her career off the ground. Would you like to talk a little bit about how that came about?
Well, that's an interesting way how that came about. I was, where was I? I was in Bianca's, I think. Mm-hmm. And that was when Bianca's wasn't a restaurant. They had gone through that kind of transition where they were making it like a little piano bar.
A cabaret kind of.
Yeah. And I remember going there, and I remember she was saying, I was really taken back by her voice and her, like she really can sing, right? I was saying. So I went up to her and I said, if you can sing Don't Stop Believing, I'd like to see, I think you can sing that song, right? And I think I'd put $10 in or 20, and she sung it. And she did such a wonderful job, and I just really enjoyed how she interacted with the crowd. I said, if anytime you're looking, at that point, she wasn't writing her own music. At that point, she would be doing maybe gigs at Greensleeves, Bianca's, that type of thing. More along what we would like to call in the business a cover artist, right?
Right.
So then, by and by, after a while, she did call me up, and then we came to an arrangement. And she started writing her own music with Rob Wells, who was a producer out of Toronto, and we put together a little team, and we're still moving forward. We're not going to stop believing, right?
That's great. Yeah. And do you think that's the kind of thing you'll continue doing in the future?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's. I don't know if I'd have time to really be supporting any other artists at this juncture of my life.
Right.
And also, Caroline is a very special person. She's extremely hard worker. She's got a great talent, and me and her really get along well with that. I mean, she gets a little bit nervous at times, like we all do. But other than that, she's somebody I very much like to work with. We've got a really good chemistry. That's not easy to find. So I mean, I wouldn't close the door on me doing this with somebody else, but not right now at this stage.
Now, I just want to get back to your doctoring. You have a very busy family practice, but you're also a clinical associate professor in family medicine at MUN. What is that exactly? Does it involve research of any kind?
Well, that's an interesting story too, man. I became a clinical associate professor through no real ambition of my own. Dean Rourke at the time, we had been meeting, talking a bit. We used to meet probably 3 times a year to talk about the medical school and some different viewpoints on, curriculum and these types of things. He wanted to get some insight for me because I also have an interest in chronic pain management. That's not being taught a lot in the medical school. So we used to have these types of discussions. And through these types of discussions, she was saying, well, sure, you're not even on faculty and you're doing all these things, and you're there, you do teach students, you're an assistant professor or a lecturer. I wasn't even lecturing, I was just teaching students in my practice. And he wanted me to do this next level, clinical associate professor. So that involves a few things. You've got to have there's 4 pillars. There's clinical leadership in your practice, there's research, there's community leadership, and there's teaching, right? And there's certain things that you have to check off. So that happened, I guess, in 2016, and that was I think my dad was really happy with that, so that was another reason I did it. That was a few years before he passed.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for being so forthcoming in your answers on the show today, and it's been a real pleasure having you on, and continued success in everything you do, and you do an awful lot. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me, Karl. It's been a pleasure.
And that's this edition of Karl Wells' Point to Point. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
If you want convenience, Marie's Money Mart is here for you.